Hi everyone. So yes, today our talk is going to be about how the LGTM stack changed the observability culture at Wise. So my name is Andy. So the question was, where are you from? So England. It's not very exciting. So things that I like to do. So about once a year, I really like to enjoy going to watch a day of Test cricket at Lord's, which is a cricket ground. I'm the squad lead at Wise, and I've worked there for just over 4.5 years. And on stage with me is...
Hi, I'm Ibukun. I'm from Nigeria, and during the weekends, I'm typically working on building my community or finding the next adventure.
Cool. Thank you. So yeah, we're both from Wise. At Wise, we have a very clear mission. This is money without borders, instant, convenient, transparent, and eventually free. So Wise was founded in 2011, and we specialize in cross-border payment transfers. So we currently have approximately 16 million customers. We move over £9 billion in cross-border volume per month. We allow our customers to move their money in over 50 currencies, and we've grown to over 5,000 employees. And within that 5,000, we have an engineering function of about 800 people. So the talk today, we're going to go through the origins of observability at Wise, the journey that we've been on, and then talk a little bit about what's next. So first, some context. So the Wise technology journey will have a very familiar feel to it. It started out as a monolith hosted in a data center. And as new services were added when the company began to grow. And monitoring was originally provided by leveraging tools such as Zabbix, Graphite, and a vendor. Over time, additional tools were added, and these were to cover things like measuring our uptime availability, some synthetic testing, managing on-call. And these additional tools were there to make sure that as we were growing, we made sure that we could identify our issues, that we could be notified of them, and ultimately go and fix them. And this was working pretty well for a while. But Wise kept growing and growing. And that speed of growth meant that the company had to rethink their architecture and how it was hosted. And the outcome included, as expected, a move to the cloud. We also did a bit of a fast forward and decided to change and go all in on the microservice architecture, leveraging Kubernetes and containers. So what did that mean for our monitoring stack? Well, the change of technology required a different approach and gave us a chance to review our tooling and our approach to monitoring and logging. This is what I like to think of as the beginning of the observability journey at Wise. So we began by creating a team, and we called that team Observability. And it had a very clear mission to make Wise observable. So first, we changed our tooling to reflect the new and growing requirements. We phased out some of the original tools and replaced them with Prometheus and Thanos for metrics. We added in Alert Manager for alerting. We increased our footprint on Elasticsearch for logs. We productionized our Grafana offering for dashboards. We added in Jaeger for tracing. All of these new offerings gave our engineers greater visibility into their services. Secondly, we decided to instrument the code. So we created a library and we unified the data that was being emitted from these various services. And we tried to ensure that we had a standardized format as all this data flowed into our new observability stack. And thirdly, we pushed for adoption. And we did this via tech talks, documentation, day-to-day support, and also starting to provide some dashboards for free. And over a couple of years, we had our product teams using the new suite of tools, and Wise was becoming observable. But our story doesn't finish there, because Wise continued to scale fast. And as Wise grew, the observability team were faced with 3 challenges. These were the volume of data, the maintenance burden, and a deteriorating customer experience. So let's quickly go through each of these. It's a very bright slide. As Wise grew, so did the demands of the observability stack, and it meant more data, more queries, increasing diversity in data sets. This meant more alerts, more metrics, more logs, more new use cases from new parts of the business. This graph here is of our service growth over the past few years. And as you know, each new microservice has a data footprint and additional cost. The challenge the team was facing is we were starting to hit limits. We needed to regularly scale our resources, or we needed to begin sharding the different data sets. In addition, the latency of getting all of that data from ingest into storage, sending back to our customers, was increasing. And we had to do things like starting to reduce the number of open indices, reducing retention, and increasing aggregation. Second challenge that we were facing was new accounts and new environments were being added often, which meant more deployments to maintain and longer and increasingly upgrade cycles. We had to replicate our infrastructure and right-size each resource. And for the team, on-call was becoming a full-time role. And thirdly, whilst we continued to meet our original objectives of making Wise observable, the actual experience of our engineers when using the stack wasn't ideal. This slide from earlier was highlighting the key tools that we transitioned the company to. But we also had additional tools for on-call, for error tracking, synthetic testing, profiling, uptime monitoring, database querying, front-end tracking. Ultimately, all of these distinct tools were starting to increase the time it was taking to restore during an incident. An example here is an alert from your on-call system, or maybe you got your alert via Slack, and then you went to your dashboard, or maybe you went to your error tracking, and then you went to your logs. We actually ended up with 15 distinct UIs for our engineers, and this led to context switching, time wasted, hopping from metric-driven alert to a log to get a trace ID. So efforts in the team began to focus on joining the dots together and creating a more seamless experience. But rather than try and solve each of these three challenges individually, we decided to pause, and we asked ourselves, was it time for a different approach? And with that, I'll hand over to Ibukun.
All right. Thanks, Andy, for walking us through the team's journey until now. Obviously, a lot of work has gone into observability at Wise, but we really needed to think about what was next. And so at this point, we took a step back to evaluate what was important to the team. And it came down to a few things. We wanted observability that was open source, cost efficient, scalable, but most importantly, properly supported. And we wanted to create a unified experience for our engineers. We wanted to give them things like observability out of the box, alerting dashboards that make their experience a lot easier. And so Grafana was easily our tool of choice. Through our journey, we've worked with the Grafana engineers to make sure that we're making the right decisions in our implementation. We've really seen them as a partner that have supported our growth. We obviously have a large volume of data, and so we looked at the fact that, one, we're using S3 as our backends, meaning that as we continue to grow our data, our cost doesn't scale exponentially. And then because Grafana is so dedicated to evolving the product, we knew that as we continue to grow and as the industry continues to change, we would have a partner that will support us through that journey. And so given our decision to go open source with Grafana as a partner, we dubbed our mission becoming Wise's observability vendor. And it's not a term that we take lightly, but we use it to gauge our performance and make decisions on what the team is going to be working on and how we implement what we're going to work on. And so given the vendor model, you sort of think about a few things that a vendor promises you when you're onboarded to them. They promise you that they're going to scale as your data grows. They promise you that they're going to give you a set of service offerings that have very specific values and usually would have an SLA attached to them. And they also promise you some level of user experience, right? And so these were things that we decided to focus on the team to sort of dictate how we continue to evolve observability at Wise. And so throughout the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk through these three things, what we're doing and what team plans to achieve given these three pillars. So for scale, the question we've always asked ourselves is, can we handle 10x? And that thinking obviously has paid off because a lot of the decisions that the team made years ago is what supports the data that we have today. But in truth, you can never really support your future scale 100%. The most you can do is sort of make decisions that make it easier to adjust as your data grows. And so even though, yes, we support the data that we have today, we're thinking, what's next? How can we continue to evolve and support WISE's scale? Our data continues to grow exponentially, and the data that you see is what we process on a daily basis. And so this is just 2x what we had last year. It's obvious that at every point when we ask ourselves, can we handle 10x? We are obviously not very far away from that. So it's a question that we have to keep asking ourselves because we know in a few years, we're going to get to that point. And so the team continues to think about scale on a team level, but we are part of a larger tribe, the platform tribe at WISE. And generally, as a tribe, we're starting to think of how can we provide a true platform to our engineers, a platform that comes out the box with everything that they need. So we're working with teams like our compute team, our connect team, CI/CD, cloud foundations, to make sure that the platform that we give to our engineers is well supported and is scalable and supports what they need to do their day-to-day jobs. And so we're currently working on a re-architecture of our observability infrastructure. And we're moving again towards this vendor model that we've discussed. And usually, there are a few things that a vendor would give you when it comes to how they collect your data and how they present your data. They would give you a set of endpoints, you would run a few commands, and you're able to get your observability up and running. And so we wanted to adopt that model of having endpoints that we use to receive data from wherever, whatever cluster, whatever piece of infrastructure, in such a way that our engineers don't care about what we do with it. We give them a set of commands, or they deploy their stuff to Kubernetes, and out the box, they're able to get observability. And so given this endpoint model, the other thing that we wanted to do was also to adopt Mimir, Tempo, and Loki. So we have a migration from Thanos to Mimir. One, because it also helps us to scale how we manage our infrastructure since they're deployed in similar ways. And so the maintenance problem that Andy talked about earlier starts to get resolved because we're reducing our infrastructure footprint, but scaling how we're able to handle data. And given the fact that you can scale the different components independently, it means that our costs can also stay doesn't have to grow exponentially because we're only scaling what we need per time, and we're making very efficient use of our resources. The other thing that goes with this is that we're able to reduce our lead time from when someone says they need observability to when they become observable. Why? Because we give you a set of endpoints, you send your data to us, and you have it up and running. The other thing we also have put into consideration is that usually when you send your data, you're sending this data from different environments, and we want our engineers to be able to interact with their data in intuitive ways. And so taking advantage of things like multi-tenancy on Grafana's side, we're able to present your data regardless of where it's coming from, production, staging, sandbox, in a way that makes sense to the engineers to interact with. And I think one of the most important pieces is actually the migration from Thanos to Mimir, because again, we have huge volume of metrics and have had issues with scale in the past. So making that migration, is actually quite key for us to continue to scale as our data grows. The second thing that we talked about are our service offerings and our SLOs. Usually, when you're implementing something, you don't want to just implement it because it's the newest technology on the market. You want to think about the value behind why you're implementing it and what that means for your engineers. We want to make sure that not only are we providing value, but we're also benchmarking our performance by actually saying okay, we've provided this thing, does it work for our engineers' use case? And is it to the level of performance that we want to be able to give? And so with everything that we adopt, with the changes that we're making, we're thinking of how can we actually measure value? So for metrics, how do we know that our users, are able to query their data in good time? How do we know that we're providing the right data as well? So we sort of did some work internally to just go through the metrics that we have and see which of these metrics actually depicts our user experience. And if we're able to measure that, it means that we can make decisions based on, we want to work on this quarter because we know that the user experience is terrible. Or this is the work that we've done this quarter and we have improved our user experience by X%. So being able to measure this value is quite critical to how we scale as a team, because again, we don't want to be doing just like a bunch of work and not having any impact on the business or not having any impact on the engineers. And so measuring our SLOs is a practice that we're adopting on the team to actually use that to prioritize the work that we do and where we, place our focus as a team as well. It's very critical for our engineers to be able to get visibility into their system. So our reliability is really a huge part of Wise's business, and it's something that we take very seriously. And so by being able to measure this, we know whether or not we're giving adequate support to our engineers. The last thing that we have is user experience. And of course, if we get the first two things right, if we're scaling and we're providing value, we would have a high user experience and high NPS, which we measure during our engineering survey. But we didn't want to stop there. We wanted to take our UX just a few steps further. The first thing, which I think we heard a lot about in this conference, is just providing that one pane of glass. We want to reduce the complexity for how our engineers find data and interact with their data. But more importantly, we really want to chart a golden path. It goes beyond just having all of your data in Grafana. It's like, how do they connect? How do you go from a metric to a log to a trace? How do you make sense of everything to be able to really troubleshoot or really understand your system performance? And so taking advantage of some of the things that Grafana provides by linking, the data between these three sources, and also exploring things like correlations since Grafana 10 are things that, we've been prioritizing to sort of create this unified user experience for our engineers. The other thing is that this also impacts adoption, because the more engineers can use their data together, the more they are, incentivized to actually adopt new things that we introduce to them as a team. And again, that sort of brings a sense of value to the team who is doing the work, that we're not just implementing new things, but we're bringing these new things as a part of a life cycle that enriches our engineers' observability experience. Well, in a perfect world, if we had all of this, our story wouldn't still be done. We still have more work to do. And so we think about the future, and we believe that even though we're making the right choices today, there's still a few things that we need to think about, in the future. The first thing is culture. Wise's observability culture has obviously evolved over the years as the team continues to evolve our stack, our processes. But then there are a few things that we factor into what we term culture. The first thing, you have your people, your processes, and your products. Your people aspect sort of relies heavily on your engineers' ability to use your tools and actually have best practices that you as a team want to push. And so being able to work with engineers to really solve their problems and to also work as partners to be able to say, this is the observability best practice and this is how we're going to enable you to follow it, is quite important. I think it's very important to note at this point that your people goes beyond just your engineering team. There are other people in the organization, product managers, customer success that can, take advantage of the data that you're collecting. We're collecting such a huge amount of data. It makes sense to be able to use that to impact the business across the company. The next thing that we think about is also process. So how do we provide support to our engineers? How do we ease the onboarding process? for people to be able to quickly and easily adopt observability, because that impacts how widespread we can go across the organization, and it impacts the completeness of our observability as well. And the final thing is the product. So for the product, you're thinking about how do we provide a top-notch product to our engineers, because ultimately, if the product doesn't work or doesn't fit their use case, then they're not going to adopt it. It's plain and simple. And so we want to ensure that we're concentrating on our people, process, and product to be able to provide and to be able to increase the adoption of the observability culture at Wise. The next thing is the evolution of our stack. Observability is a fast-evolving industry. It's a fast-moving world, and we know that with the adoption of new trends or with the emergence of new trends, it improves how much visibility and how much understanding that you're able to get into your system. And so we have our eyes on a few things that Grafana is releasing, and it's so exciting to be here and sort of hear the future of the product, because we know that even though we're being cautious in our approach of introducing new things, because again, we're a financial company and we're responsible for people's money, and it's not a responsibility that we take lightly. But we know that, if we don't sort of, in a sense, keep up with what is available in the industry, we sort of start to fall back behind, and it means that we might not be providing the best product to our engineers. So we keep our eyes on these things, and as new things come up, we start to think of, again, what is the value that this is going to provide to our engineers, and how can we bring this into our ecosystem? The final thing that we're thinking about is balance. It takes a lot of work, to maintain and build your own infrastructure and your own observability, especially at Wise's scale. And so it's not lost on us that there would come a time where our engineering or our maintenance costs, start to outweigh what it would cost to pay a vendor. And so we're keeping an eye on this balance such that we know that the responsibility of being Wise's observability vendor could potentially evolve to a place where we're doing this in partnership with a company that aligns with our value, our mission, and supports, what we want to do at Wise and how we want to continue to grow our observability team, our observability tools, and our observability culture. And so some of our infrastructure decisions today are actually preparing us for a future where we partner with Grafana to create this ecosystem of providing an observability platform that's top-notch, while we sort of focus on the best practices and making sure that our team continues to evolve as our observability is evolving. We're looking at things like adaptive metrics, that can reduce our cost. We're looking at things like anomaly detection that helps us to really understand our data, because our mission at Wise is really to provide money without borders that's eventually free. And being eventually free, the infrastructure costs actually play into that mission. So at the point where we're, thinking about these things, or where we sort of are faced with this question of, build versus buy, the thing that we're going to be asking ourselves really is that, how does this support Wise's mission? And I think the direction in which Grafana Cloud is going, and in what we've heard today, sort of helps us to maybe make that decision a bit easier in the future. And so we think that this is a future that's really possible. That brings me to the end of my talk. If you're curious about what we're doing observability-wise and engineering-wise, you can definitely check out our blog, Engineering at Wise. So that's medium.com/wise-engineering. And if you find anything really interesting, we also have a couple of roles. We have a number of roles, engineering and platform, that you can check out as well on wise.jobs. And thank you so much for listening to us today. And